Hi everyone. My name is Pooja Shastri. I'm the chair of the first panel. Hi to all three of our speakers on the first panel. I'll sort of quickly introduce all three of you, and then because you have a pre-formed panel, and then we're ready to hear from you. So Extinction Media, Moving Image, Animals in an Era of Species Eradication, has three speakers who are here with us. Benjamín Schultz-Figueroa is an assistant professor in film studies at Seattle University. His research focuses on the history of scientific filmmaking, non-theatrical film, and animal studies. Among other venues, his writing has been published in JCMS, the Journal of Cinema and Media Studies, Film History, and the Journal of Environmental Media. His book, The Celluloid Specimen, Moving Image Research into Animal Life, was published in 2023. Our second speaker, Pao-chen Tang, is a lecturer in film studies at the University of Sydney. Currently, he is writing his first book, which explores the worldview of animism in contemporary cinema. He is also co-editing a volume devoted to the intersection of medicine, public health, and East Asian media. And our final speaker on the panel, Yafei Wang, is a professor of film and digital media at University of California, Santa Cruz. She is author of Remaking Chinese Cinema Through the Prism of Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Hollywood, published in 2013, and To Be an Actress, Labor and Performance in Anna May Wang's Cross-Media World, published in 2024. She has also published in journals and edited volumes on Chinese cinema, independent documentary, ethnic stardom, eco-cinema, film remakes, and adaptation. She is editor of a special issue of Feminist Media Histories, co-editor of an In Focus dossier of Journal of Cinema and Media Studies, and co-editor of the Global East Asian Screen Cultures book series published by Bloomsbury. We are really excited to hear from you guys. Whenever you're ready to go.
So hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. I'm Benjamín Schultz-Figueroa, and this is my talk, Wild and Tame, Animal Aesthetics as Pathos or Alienation. I want to apologize if I'm a little delirious right now. It's early in the morning here in Seattle, and my youngest was up with a fever all night, so kind of all over the place. Hopefully that won't be, too
No,
confusing.
thank you for joining us anyway.
Okay, so, oh, there we go. So, let me get this. This presentation is part of a larger book manuscript dedicated to understanding a subsection of 21st century nonfiction films focusing on animals, a project that is tentatively titled Beastly Futures Multi-Species Documentary During Mass Extinction. The group of films I am referring to as multi-species documentary, following the lead of anthropologists Ivan Kirksey and Stefan Helmrich, is a brand of experimental documentary that uses unconventional aesthetics to represent non-human subjects. Examples include Elisa Barbash and Lucien Casting Taylor's Sweetgrass from 2009, Nicholas Filbert's Nanette from 2010, Casting Taylor and Verena Paravel's Leviathan from 2012, Dennis Coates' Bestiary from 2012, Saya Torrens' Ketty from 2016, Victor Koskovsky's Gunta, and Andrea Arnold's Cow, both from 2021, among many others. Unlike so-called blue chip nature documentaries such as David Attenborough's Blue Planet series, these films rarely deploy voiceover or talking head interviews, focusing instead on animals as complex and mysterious subjects. In the broader project, it is my contention that these 21st century experimental animal documentaries should be primarily read as a genre of wildlife filmmaking that arises as a response to what some have called the sixth great extinction, a moment in which millions of animal species are being wiped off the planet due to the mass anthropogenic destruction of natural environments. Unlike earlier animal documentaries, which primarily picture animals as either holdovers from a vanishing past or as ahistorical representatives of a domesticated nature, I argue that the subjects in these newer works are deeply wrapped up in concerns over the future, a future in which the ongoing existence of human and non-human life is no longer assured. My goal in the larger work is to map the ideological contradictions that structure and fuel this contemporary mode of filmmaking. Like any genre, I claim that multi-species documentaries are premised on a series of oppositions and congruences, which exist within individual films as well as between different entries in the genre at large. For instance, I have elsewhere identified one such foundational contradiction as the desire to use film as a means of encountering animals in all their complexity versus using film as a means of preserving taxidermy versions of animals that could persist long after their impending eradication. Today, I'll be discussing another of these oppositions, one that exists between animals as subjects of pathos and emotional catharsis versus as subjects of alienation and estrangement. So let me give a few examples for us to consider. The first comes from the 2016 documentary Kedi, where an anonymous cat lover in Istanbul states that being close with cats is like, quote, having a friendship with an alien, end quote. The observation is followed by a montage of extreme close-ups of cat faces, emphasizing the peculiar, even mesmerizing quality of their large glassy eyes. Similarly, while pondering the alien lives and bodies of different genera of moths in his 2023 experimental documentary, The Night Visitors, Michael Gitlin wonders whether these lepidopteran animals might not possess, quote, a form of intelligence that is not organized spatially, but instead is strung for 1,000,000 years across a temporal thread, a time mind gradually gathering, end quote. Another example, Dennis Coates' 2012 observational doc Bestiary is almost completely constructed through long, dialogue-free close-ups on animal faces who stare blankly back at the camera and thus at viewers. These animal expressions have an opacity to them that emphasizes their unreadable motivations and the mysteriousness of their gaze. Finally, in Verena Paravel and Lucian Casting Taylor's 2012 documentary Leviathan, GoPro cameras are attached to a flock of seagulls, producing a completely disorienting and overwhelming feeling for viewers who are relentlessly carried along by the birds in both air and water. The incessant cawing and swarm-like behavior of these avian others creates a strange, even brutal, inhuman landscape. What do all these scenes tell us? To my mind, they are representative of a relatively new approach to presenting animals on screen. Within many multi-species documentaries, animals are framed as beings akin to aliens, creatures whose ways of processing the world are primarily defined as unknown, perhaps even unknowable to human observers. These films are structured so as to emphasize non-human animals' divergent sensoriums, their ornately varied anatomies, and their often baffling behavior, transforming otherwise mundane creatures such as seagulls, moths, parrots, cats, etc., into rich sources of imaginative speculation and awe. But importantly, not all animals in multi-species documentary are presented in this way. Indeed, many of them are represented in quite the opposite fashion, as beings clearly relaying emotional content that audiences can easily identify and sympathize with. These films draw from melodrama when representing their animal subjects much more than they do from science fiction. For instance, Ninette, Gunta, and Cow all focus on individual animals whose images are charged with an overabundance of emotion. It is perhaps unsurprising that the main characters of these films are mothers. Similar to the human mothers in Stella Dallas or a host of other maternal melodramas, the suffering of animal mothers is repeatedly used to evoke excessive emotions in audiences, such as when we watch the fretting Gunta as she desperately paces back and forth, squealing for the return of her piglets, or when we watch a herd of calves in cow joyfully running down a country lane after we have just seen their mother get shot in the head. Or finally, when we watch close-ups that linger over Nanette's aging body as we hear of generation after generation of her children growing up in captivity at the Paris Zoo. Maternal pathos, it appears, is not restricted to our own species, and thus these animals become the subjects of audiences' sympathetic feelings of mourning and loss. This style of animal representation stands in stark contrast to the forms of alienation that are also present in multi-species documentary, and I would argue that the tension between these two approaches is an energizing one for the genre, which on the one hand emerges from a deep desire to connect with animals, while simultaneously being motivated by an equally strong conviction that such connections are impossible. Alternating between grief and awe, sympathy and estrangement, pathos and alienation, multi-species documentaries are dedicated to creating cathartic relationships between human viewers and animal images, while also simultaneously mourning the vast expanse of unknown animal experience that is currently being eradicated. The former approach tends towards the poignant, the interpersonal, and the familiar, while the latter evokes the sublime, the horrifying, and the alien. It is my contention that the alternation between these two styles, melodrama and science fiction, is symptomatic of contemporary attempts to process animal extinction at a mass scale. I don't know if those GIFs were working, but I guess. I think of many of these films, again, as a form of science fiction documentary, an attempt to record and reconcile a future that has yet to arrive. Writing for the journal Science Fiction Studies, Brent Ryan Bellamy argues that climate change, quote, forces a cognitive transformation, end quote, in how we view the present and its relationship to history. He notes the omnipresence of this issue he notes that the omnipresence of this issue infuses even the most mundane events, objects, and phenomena with looming questions about our collective future as a species. I would claim that animals and the stories and images made about them have been especially affected by this changing perspective. As David Ingram argues, images of animals have always been intimately connected to concerns over climate, conservation, and ecology, functioning as powerful metaphors for human relationships with environmental forces. Animals play a similar role in science fiction, having a unique capacity to evoke audience speculation and wonder in the face of a lively, non-human world. Cheryl Vint chronicles the long tradition of science fiction film and literature depicting animals as alien outsiders and otherworldly presences. Thus, animal imagery in these documentaries produce a form of double vision, one in which we see the animal as it exists in front of the camera, while simultaneously seeing them as heralds of a future without us and perhaps without them. Following Bellamy, we might say that in our current climate moment, the act of taking a camera out to record the present is also a way of examining and negotiating our feelings and anxieties about the future. When I describe these films as science fiction documentaries, I don't just mean that in terms of their content, such as the alien-like portrayals of animals I just listed, but also in terms of how they function. In Vivian Sobczak's foundational text, Screening Space, the American Science Fiction Film, she argues that science fiction as a genre is primarily defined by its use of empirical science as well as other epistemological traditions such as magic and religion, to reconcile human society with the unknown. Science fiction shares this pursuit with documentary. Documentarians go out and quote unquote discover, although we can call that into question, with their camera, spurring a collective national or international conversation about the realities they lay bare. They bring unknown realities into the public sphere where they are discussed and thus become known. Similarly, according to Sobchak, one of science fiction's main functions is to visualize and familiarize audiences with alien topics, including actual aliens, but also the outer reaches of space, events in the future, alternate histories, and so on. Both forms, science fiction and documentary, respond to a similar anxiety about the unknown by claiming to visualize and present on screen what would otherwise be inaccessible. Here, what seems utterly opposed about these filmmaking practices, documentaries' recording of actual historical events as they unfold in front of the camera, versus science fiction's elaborate fabrications of outlandish worlds, could be seen as outgrowths of the same pursuit.
Sorry to interrupt, Benjamin. Could you summarize in 3 minutes? You have 3 minutes left.
Only 3 minutes left. Okay. Wow. In these instances, animals are living harbingers of terrifying world to come. Their obscure presence on screen evokes the obscurity of the future itself during a time of mass extinction. We stare at their images in the hope that by doing so, we can inoculate ourselves against other looming unknowns. At the same time, while science fiction has increasingly been recognized as the predominant genre for understanding the present, for instance, think Kim Stanley Robinson's claim that science fiction is, quote unquote, the realism of our time, there is also another more maligned genre that I would argue helps to explain contemporary cinematic representations of animals, and that is the melodrama. Discussing a different context, the eminent film scholar Mitsuhiro Yoshimoto argues that melodrama is paradigmatically a historical genre, one that has been suppressed by postmodern culture's eradication of history. Yoshimoto claims that melodrama displaces major sociopolitical and historical shifts onto interpersonal relationships and individual interactions, relaying history through the conflicts between different subjectivities created by new and old social orders. Climate change can undoubtedly be read as one such historical fissure, a massive change that brings with it new forms of subjectivity. While science fiction grapples with this change by attempting to narrativize history as a coherent subject, melodrama investigates the experience of being a subject to history, and thus the essential emotions of living through historical events on the ground. As a genre, melodrama, with its emotional intensities and palimpsests of interpersonal connections, is a framework for understanding how history is felt through changing subjectivities. In multi-species documentaries, non-human animals become the avatars for these experiences of change. Here, the animal becomes a form of emotional dumping ground where overwhelming feelings of loss, helplessness, and love can be expressed at the register of the individual. In films like Gunta and Cow, the callous destruction of animal life and its echoes in the mass extinctions occurring all around us become embodied and individuated through these non-human figures. In a strange way, it is the animal's symbolic capacity to exist outside of human politics that make it an ideal subject for projecting sociopolitical emotional concerns about climate change and its impact on society. By not functioning as historical or political actors, they can become subjected to history in a way that human characters are not. Within the framework of the melodrama, they bear the weight of witnessing history as it unfolds, carrying that weight with them in their lives and in their deaths. So to conclude, hopefully within time, My my claim is that the shifting valences of animal representation in multi-species documentary is symptomatic of widespread conflicting desires and anxieties about the future. The sixth great extinction is currently in the process of reordering all elements of human society, from national borders to industrial agriculture. In this context, animals are both the subjects of extreme estrangement and emotional investment. Through the changing genre forms used to represent them, they personify this ambivalence. In these films, we stare intently, gasp and shudder, sob and mourn, both for ourselves and our non-human counterparts on screen. Thank you.
Much.
Thank you so much for first of all, thanks to the conference organizer for being able to accommodate our schedules, and also for Ben for putting us together, and Pooja for chairing the panel. So then I'll just dive into it. So my title is Extinction Countdown: The Impossible Mission of Imaging Living Fossil. Oops. So growing up in China, the term that I became very familiar with is living fossil, which now, according to, not now, but according to Merriam-Webster dictionary, is defined as an organism that has remained essentially unchanged from earlier geological times and whose close relatives are usually extinct. So what's interesting here is that extinction has already happened. So it's in the past as well as in the future. And that is a Webster definition. And for me, growing up with this term in Chinese, 活化石, what intrigues me is the paradoxical logic of the living fossil, which suggests life and death, existence and extinction all at once. That is, life that could very well have ceased to exist and is bound to go extinct. And yet, this life's persistence, posited as abnormality, underscores the aberration of an overdetermined teleological narrative. So a couple of images I have here for the living fossil in China. One is the ginkgo tree. The other one, obviously, is a giant panda. And the cub on the ground is Ming, and he was the first panda cub born in captivity in 1963 in Beijing Zoo. But the human-raised panda cubs did not succeed until 1992, which is almost 3 decades later after the captive reproduction. So the paradoxical logic of the living fossil then offers an angle for understanding extinction as both counting down and counting otherwise. By moving away from the single perspective narrative of countdown extinction, my goal is not to deny the anthropogenic sixth extinction, but rather to delineate how the knowledge and feelings of planetary polycrisis have been produced, narrativized, and conveyed to the public through the various media forms. And in my discussion, it's going to be mostly films. I explore this question by looking at zoo and circus films and animated films produced in China during the socialist era. So, so it's not exactly capitalist industrial production, but it also has the similar kind of logic. But it's not exactly what I'm talking about here, though. So I intend to explore this. I intend to expand this study to the post-socialist era to consider how the living fossil trope has been reshaped under what Yafei Li and Judy Shapiro describe as China's, quote, coercive and authoritarian environmentalism for a troubled planet, end quote. So my study is going to draw upon 2 books. One is Anna Tsing and Jennifer de Geer and several other people's recent book, Field Guide to the Patchy Anthropocene, where they emphasize the importance of patches and arguing that the patches actually make the Anthropocene and including its planetary forms. The other concept they emphasize is the pharaoh, and they define the pharaoh as something that is transformed by human infrastructure, but not under the control of human designers. So in other words, the pharaoh, according to these authors, forces us to pay attention to what was once hidden in the gap between wild and domestic. So, and then the second book that I find to be useful to think with, it's not okay, is Entangled Encounters at the National Zoo, which talks about the first national zoo in the U.S. But then the author Wandersamas and his notion of a zoo as a tentacular institution in the way that it reaches in all kinds of directions. And then the zoo is also a wild cultural entity. So which means that it escapes within, as a wild cultural entity, it escapes within the captive society, the society of captivity that created it. So both books turn their attention to the liminal space between the wild and the totally controlled, so as to foreground the human and the more than human entanglements. They also both lean on storytelling and infrastructural analysis to unpack the interactions of multi-histories, locations, and perspectives in any given patch or the tentacular zoo. In my study, I want to think of zoo and circus as a social and ecological patch where exploitation, infrastructural design, caregiving, conservation, research, and education come together and also conflict with each other. And this is also the place where the pharaoh continues to hunt a seemingly fully controlled environment in the zoo or the circus. And in the context of the socialist China, I want to think about how do zoo and circus films navigate the competing interests as outlined above, and specifically, how did wildlife exploitation square with their conservation against extinction? So the remaining, this study is also very preliminary. So the remainder of the paper will be pretty much going through some material to try to pull some thoughts together. So I really would appreciate feedback. So the one living fossil that I'm focusing on today is the giant panda. So the giant panda has a history. It was discovered in 1860 something by a French missionary in southwest China, and then afterwards, after that, pandas had been poached pretty frequently, dead and alive. And the first panda that was poached in China and arrived in the US in 1936, it was the poacher was Ruth Harkness, who is also a costume designer turned a poacher. And and then in 1941, Panda started animal diplomacy being given from the Chinese government then to the US government at the beginning of the war, or actually in China, it was during the war. And then after 1949, with People's Republic of China being established, there was large-scale state-sponsored hunting of pandas for the Beijing Zoo. And pandas have been basically serving the purpose of display and also the objects of captive research. So in the 1954 science education film called The Zoo, this was basically shot in the Beijing Xijiao Zoo, which a year later was renamed Beijing Zoo. And it's a very straightforward kind of science education film geared for school children. And the voiceover highlights animals gifted from USSR, GDR, East Germany, Vietnam, and India, unsurprisingly, because these countries were at the time more aligned with each other. And the film provides straightforward information, but it also does not shy away from commenting on useful animals, meaning that they could be used for medicine or as beasts of burden, and then also does not shy away on commenting on bad animals, including wolves and foxes. There is an omnipresent reference to the infrastructure of the zoo, which includes caging and fencing, and it's taken for granted animals are kept this way in the zoo for optimal display situation. And there's also the shots being spliced together of animal in action in order to create the illusion of continuity. So in other words, it's a science education film, but it's very much about a form of producing specific kinds of knowledge for school-age children. And very interestingly, there is no mention of the giant panda, even though right after 1949, as I mentioned earlier, the state-sponsored hunting for pandas already started on a very large scale, but there's no mention of panda here. And then fast forward to 1983, this is a 3D kind of comedy film. It's called The Happy Zoo, and it's supposedly one zoo, but actually a compilation of footage shot at a number of different zoos full of happy animals, because they're all performing. Here, as you can see, the panda is featured very prominently, doing all kinds of stunt work. Another film, this is a fiction film called Miss Jiao Jiao from 1986. Again, you see the panda being the star actress here. We actually don't know if the panda itself is male or female, but in the narrative, the panda is gendered female, and it's a big participant of this film. Is the Shanghai Circus Troupe, and it's about how to train show animals from the change of the practice from stick and whip to friendship and treating wild animals as kids. As you can see here, the panda is coming down the slide with all the kindergarten kids watching and applauding. You can't really see because it's kind of blocked by my text, but you get the idea. And then the panda here is also shown lying on a carriage being pulled by a dog, and then the panda is blowing a musical instrument. And after this very successful performance, the panda is given a medal that comes around its her neck, and then she's holding a bouquet of flowers, waving to the audience. So basically,
I'm so sorry. You have 3 minutes to wrap up, if that's okay.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'll quickly go through. So basically, this is a rescue narrative about how to train the panda and other wild animals, in a more friendly way. And there is one detail that is when the panda was rescued from this cruel trainer, the good trainer takes the panda to this place on the left side. It's called the Save the Giant Panda Expo. So the mission is to save the panda, but then as it unfolds, the panda becomes, as you can see here, the panda is seated at the table and eating Western cakes and so on. And then you have all the panda branded product placements all around the space, all around. Basically, in the background, it's all panda branded product placement. And then you have the commercial companies being called in right away to film the panda doing this kind of performance. So in other words, the rescue narrative inevitably turns into commercial exploitation. So far, it seems like there's nothing to do with extinction, but at the same time, there is a parallel discourse. As you can see here, I didn't have time to translate it, but it's a 1979 film, literally entitled A Poem on a Living Fossil, Panda. And the last line of the poem says that bad people will poach the panda, and then that will lead to the impending extinction. And in 1982, there is an article called Saving the Panda. So so this is another example, 1981, China-Japan co-produced animation. Here you can see basically it's a panda's narrative from the panda's perspective. And you see he was born, and then he was in his mother's arms, and then he was caught by Western poachers. And then the third image on the right, you can see is that the layers, it's the cell animation, the layers of the landscape, which closes, suggesting that the panda is forced to leave his hometown. And then the panda lands in a Western zoo and forced to become a show animal. And then he tries to escape and only reaches the ocean. And then that's also the moment of supreme despair, that he realizes he cannot go home again. And finally, he has his out-of-body experience of going through the cages and flying back home, and now he's back in his mom's arm. His mom is actually already shot before he himself is poached, and then the last shot of or almost the last shot of the film is that the panda is found dead in the cage. So and then Panda 1984 is a science education film, which is a film that I haven't seen, but interestingly, it's awarded a golden medal at the Italian Nature, Human Environment International Film Festival. So I haven't seen this film, so I can't say that much. But what's interesting here is, again, this parallel discourse of, on the one hand, you have panda being exploited and extremely commercialized, but on the other hand, panda also serves as the object of research and scientific exploration. So the science education film, a later one that I did see is The Last Panda, 1999. And again, so here, literally from the very outset, the voiceover tells us that the panda faces impending extinction due to habitat loss. But also, more importantly, according to the voiceover, the extinction is caused by the species' own inadequacy, because it is a living fossil. It's almost already living on borrowed time. It's almost like it's already extinct already. And then the rest of the film sort of basically shows de-extinction and rescue through human civilization and technology. So on the one hand, you have cuteness overload, as you see in the top picture of all of these panda cubs are come from artificial insemination. And then on the bottom left, you see the panda behind the cages, and the voiceover tells us that the panda lives a much longer life in captivity because their diet is a lot healthier than just bamboo. And so in other words, it's better to be in captivity. And then the middle bottom image is one of the steps in artificial insemination. And then on the right hand, you see an experiment with cloning panda with a rabbit's cell. All right, so the last one is, I'm sorry, it's kind of all over the place. So a third parallel line is about the panda conservation is oftentimes, connected with the work with ethnic minorities. So you have a comic book here, which shows that the Han people and the Tibetan people work together in the panda conservation. And then the bottom two images on the left side is a woman from Zhuang ethnicity, and she is cuddling this panda who is the first one from artificial insemination. And on the right side, you have the panda mom cuddling the panda, and this is a panda, the firstborn in captivity in Beijing. So in some ways, you have this very interesting, I guess, also echoing what Ben says about the motherhood here. Then the motherhood that crosses between, in this case, a Zhuang ethnic woman and a panda mom. So the kind of connection between minoritized women and panda mom is something interesting to think more about. So I'll just conclude with several questions. That is living fossil a useful term for thinking about ecological renewal and biodiversity? Because all the films that I've shown so far, are interesting, but they also have very strong underpinnings, ideological underpinnings. And what purpose does de-extinction serve? And if it's desirable, how to do it the right way? All right. So that's the end of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So many interesting things there. Thanks so much.
Oh, wait, I would also like to thank the organizer for putting this together and especially accommodating all of us from such a wide range of time zones. And just as a maybe a kind of a preview, my project is in a really kind of preliminary stage. It's a kind of very recent encounter with a video artist based in Taiwan, whose work I was kind of deeply touched when I view them. So maybe unlike Ben's a lot more sophisticated second book work, this is going to be a more sustained engagement with one single piece of video that I recently encountered.
Pao-chen, I was wondering if you want to try and share.
Yeah, it might actually be working now. So let me see if I could share my screen. Can you guys see this?
We can see it. Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. So sorry for the tech glitches earlier. I'll just go straight right in. So Extinction Studies has emphasized the merit of visibility, not only to bring into light the human-driven loss of biodiversity and animal cultures, but also to turn distant witnessing into such collective actions as ecological monitoring, preservation, and restoration. Given the wide exposure that representational practices from natural documentary to literary storytelling gain in popular culture, they play a crucial role in developing environmental education and environmentalist activism. To date, a number of impressive work has been created, and much research in the humanities and social science has been done on the performative dimensions and affective charges of representational practices, both regarded as key to the strategic mobilization of the viewer's active participation in eco-politics. Sorry, just the next slide. While I fully agree with the value of these representational works that consciously elicit spectatorial actions and further participations in eco-politics, the artwork that my talk explores today, the Taiwanese animator Zhang Xuzhan's 2017 video, Si-ji-mei, betrays a different agenda. Although this short video of only about 5 minutes features anthropogenic animal death, it focuses on a specific kind of death at once highly visible in the thick of the everyday, and yet routinely downplayed in our discussion of extinction, namely roadkill animals. While it is safe to say that the video is quite affective, right, its main objective is perhaps not to encourage commonly seen forms of eco-activism, such as mass gathering and protest. Indeed, the video doesn't even seem to call for any specific action that might carry obvious eco-political instrumentality. Rather, I think the video prioritized the grieving for animal death as an ethical imperative during the time between our first encounter with animal death and our later attempt to take up any quote-unquote de-extinction initiative. This period of mourning, I would suggest, is what most environmentalist stories acknowledge but ultimately seek to overcome so that actions deemed more concrete and perhaps quote-unquote useful can take place. As I would also suggest, the exhibition format of the video, as well as the material of paper sculpture, used to construct the video's diegetic world, collectively work to extend the duration we might allow ourselves to spend on grieving for, and more importantly, with the animals, which I'll elaborate in a bit. So the video starts with a still shot, which sees a triangular object placed on the ground of a forest. The shot grants us more than 30 seconds to look at the object. No explanation is given as to its context and significance. All we hear are amplified sounds of wind blowing and bird chirping. I'm gonna play the opening of the video, but I'll just talk over it. So the opening shot soon fades to black, revealing the title card of the video. Music of droning emerges in the dark, soon before the images fades from black to show a close-up of the acoustic source. More images soon follow, capturing a procession featuring maggots crawling towards a shared destination in several queues. The rhythm of their movements follow the direction of several mice, one of which is the drummer previously seen. Joining the drummer are 3 mice who play trumpets, 3 other mice who dance with red ribbons, 1 other mice in charge of the cymbals, and all of them are coordinated by a conductor mouse carrying a swagger stick. Next. It is not until the final 30 seconds of the video that the destination and purpose of this coordinated march are revealed. A funeral procession for a roll-killed mouse who dies on the precise location occupied by the triangular object in the top. A party head appears there, encircled by the 3 ribbon dancers. As the dancers move around in circles, so the head starts to rotate. The vector of rotation further extends centrifugally, as the maggot soon crawl around the head clockwise as well. As if the disease has been summoned, at the literal center of this ritual appears a killed mouse whose body seems flattened by an external force. It wears the rotating hat and stares into a mirror on the reflective surface of which the viewer encounters its gaze. A series of dissolve takes the camera away from the scene as the funeral slowly comes to an end. The video concludes with the same shot of the triangular object at the beginning, but now a sense of clarity transpires. Not only does it mark the scene of killing, but it also serves as a tombstone of some sort, a memorial of a life arbitrarily taken. So according to the artist, he made the video after noticing a roadkill mouse on a street next to a busy market next to his Taipei dwelling. For several days, he walked past its side and the corpse remained drying up each day. No one paid attention to it until the dead body eventually decayed and dissolved. This encounter brought back his childhood memory of witnessing other forms of animal suffering, including one time when he saw a group of caged mice drowned in a bucket full of water. So he started to think about why certain forms of violence towards the animal remains unseen, even if in plain sight. Though interesting, what prompted his production of the video was perhaps not so much the desire to make these animals seen as the inquiry into how we should respond to such violence and death made ordinary. So as James C. Desmond has pointed out, among all forms of anthropogenic animal death in the age of mass extinction, the roadkill animal remains one of the most understudied fields. Even though it is estimated that about 1 million animals die each day in the US alone due to the country's dominant automobile culture and dense highway network, there's a general sense that this kind of killing is arbitrary and unintentional due to the quote-unquote, I would have avoided it if I safely could have rationale, which leads to a legal and ethical understanding that does not attach blame to the driver of a vehicle that causes the death of an animal. Involuntary animal slaughter is rarely, if ever, a crime. To a certain extent, road killing is even considered unavoidable insofar as the unfortunate animal simply stays in the wrong place at the wrong time. The animal is presumed to be unwittingly responsible for his or her own death. In most cases, drivers might not be aware of the roadkill and simply drive on. And even if the drivers acknowledge their act of killing, the acknowledgement is typically private and not widely shared, possibly for fear of being ridiculed. So several visual artists have responded to these perceived associations with road killing by bringing visibility to the killed animals. So from Craig Stysak's bronze sculpture modeled after roadkill corpses and placed at the site of killing, to Steve Baker's photographs created for art galleries, photographs of roadkill animals that he found in Norfolk in UK. So a conceptual thread that runs across these work is to give new meanings to these animals as historical records of human-caused loss, and more importantly, grievable individualized subjects. I would suggest that Si-ji-mei, the video, echoes this group of existing works, but turns the attention away from the individualization of animals to the necessity of mourning these unfortunate losses through a proper set of ritualistic procedures. To take, for instance, the music of the video, which I did not play for you, but that the music that the Band of Mice plays in the video, which is a 19th century German song. You can see the title here. And this song has somehow become the most frequently played music in funerals in Taiwan for some reason. The use of paper to construct the figures, the mice in the video, also point to the Chinese funerary practice of burning paper-made objects to the deceased as a way for the living to communicate with the netherworld and offer sacrifices. So the basic idea is that whatever you like to send to the deceased, you could just do so by burning paper-made replicas. And there are, paper-made objects of literally everything you can think of in Taiwan, from this paper B&W to all these paper mansions that you can easily purchase from a shopping website. So in other words, from content to form to materiality, the production of the video stages a funerary scenography of display, which we, the viewers, are invited to join. The cyclicality that characterized the video's exhibition format as a gallery projection on the loop, with the work beginning and ending with the same shot featuring that triangular object, further conditions spectatorship, the spectatorship that we're asked to take up. As we watch and rewatch the video in the gallery, again and again, we imagine experiencing the funeral for the mouse and nothing but the funeral. No duration of ritualized mourning is long enough for us to overcome an otherwise trivialized loss. Here, one cannot help but recall film critic and theorist André Bazin's famous description of cinema's ability in his essay, Death Every Afternoon. I quote him, to not only capture an irreversible single moment of reality, such as the absolutely singular moment of death, but also to repeat any one of these moments indefinitely. As Bazin claims, this is why the representation on screen of a bull being put to death is in principle as moving as the spectacle of the real instant that it produces. In a certain sense, it is even more moving because it magnifies the quality of the original moment through the contrast of its repetition. It concurs on an additional solemnity. The cinema has given death, right, quote unquote death, a material eternity. So I think what this video asks us to further entertain is what comes after the cinematic death, right, of animals that keeps on repeating itself, a continuous process of mourning initiated by the endless funeral procession. So the title of my talk, Funeral Every Afternoon. By focusing on prolonging the mouse's funeral, the video echoes Tom Van Doren and Deborah Burrose's proposal to, I'm quoting them, to spend a little time with the dead in the age of mass extinction. The two scholars here are reacting against the tendency of scientific optimism in extinction research that jumps perhaps a little bit too fast from witnessing extinction to initiating the extinction program that aims to bring back the lost lives. By slowing down this process to grieve for the dead as such, rather than as an impending return in the future, a practical space where more careful consideration operates is opened up, allowing us to rethink what might constitute a suitable environment where we're truly ready to bring back the disease through scientific means. This is also a space where ethical issues can be considered. The environment that we create for the restoration of lives entails not simply sufficient conditions of materiality and biodiversity, but also a renewed understanding of the non-human other, as well as human-animal relationality more generally, which will then ensure the sustainability of the de-extinct species. So I'm going to end the talk today by proposing one such ethical concern or dimension that the video touches upon with regard to how we might conceptualize the animal other, namely our acknowledgement of non-animal others as mourners of their own fellows. Indeed, the animal's capacity to mourn or to grieve has long been denied in Western logocentrism. After all, how can animals mourn the death of others if they cannot even conceptualize death to begin with, right? As per a dominant tradition in Western philosophy that sees the animal as poor in the world. Yeah, if that's the case, how should we address such commonly seen view on the road as the image I'm about to show you? And just a little bit of a trigger warning, I'm going to play a clip that features a roadkill animal. If you don't want to view, maybe do something else now. So I found this online and someone recorded this. I find this kind of deeply touching, right? That this group of birds somehow encircle this roadkill fellows. And there are a lot of kind of explanation given by modern ethologists as to why animals, at least certain animals do this, right? Some of the commonly given explanations suggest that these animals are it's a form of observation, curiosity, or even a kind of learning process of some sort, right? So for instance, by attending to their fellow's corpse, these birds here acquire the information that this particular site is a dangerous space. As a result, they will have to avoid this location in the trajectory of their travel or flight in the future. But rarely, if ever, does modern ethology entertain the possibility of animal mourning, right? Insofar as it doesn't carry any seemingly instrumental value that aids the collective survival of either the animal individual or community, right? Unlike the kind of information instrumental kind of view. But can we really deny this possibility? Or if such possibility remains uncertain, what might be the ethical implication to take seriously the animal's capacity to mourn their fellows on the road? The refusal to entertain these questions then constitute a double blindness of the richly affective animal interiority on top of the frequently overlooked roadkill corpses, where Western philosophy conventionally denies and where studies of animal behavior has perhaps not yet achieved. And our work, like Zhang Xudan's video, creates a quiet space for us to recognize, approximate, or at least imagine the mourning for and with animals, even as cost devastatingly speed and passes by. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pao-chen Wang, and thank you so much to everyone on this panel. Thank you. So this is, to be honest with you, I mean, even though I'm chairing this panel, this is not really my subject, and I don't really want to take away space from someone who might have more pressing questions. I have questions of my own, but I was just wondering if anyone here has something they'd like to ask our panelists. Okay, let me just start off with my own question then. So I feel like across your presentations in talking about sort of different types of moving image media, multi-species documentaries, animated features, science education films, and the particular subjects they address, something that kind of I'm curious about is what the interplay is between the narratives that have been constructed around the animals in the films versus sort of government or international policy and legislations in a contemporary time period to the film, and how these things are talking to each other. I would love to hear from each of you on that. Benjamín, if you want to go first, or any of you.
Oh, sure. I mean, so I think what you're talking about are these institutional structures that frame and delimit what we see in some ways. And those kinds of institutional structures are very hard to visualize, I think, in some ways, and especially when we're talking about massive ones like, say, industrial agriculture or fossil fuels or deforestation, right? Industries that cause deforestation. So I think that one thing that you see with animals, at least in the documentaries that I'm studying, but also I think generally, is that often these institutional structures really delimit the possible meanings that an animal image can take. And we have to constantly be working to reinsert them in order to understand what the stakes of an animal image are, because I think that, and so I go into this quite a bit in my book, The Celluloid Specimen, but their scientific contexts really are essential for understanding images of animals that are being produced on film. And so I think it's the same with all of these other documentary images as well. I don't think you can extricate Gunta, for instance, from factory farming and from the impact of factory farming on climate and animal species. So, but again, that might ultimately be our work as scholars and critics to reassert the industrial context, because it's so easy for that context to be eclipsed by the really charismatic animal figure we see on screen.
Thank you so much. I feel like the theme links a lot more to Yiman's work. I am curious about the interplay between those two things, since you work across so many time periods. I mean, the films that you spoke about are from several different decades.
Yeah, so in my case, I think the fact that the state is the major player, and that just so obvious in the socialist era films that I'm talking about, right? Because all these films are state sponsored, and when I went from one, I think. Yeah, so when I went from the Happy Zoo to Happy Zoo is supposedly this more documentary kind of film about all the show animals performing so perfectly. When I went from that to the fiction film Miss Jiao Jiao, which is narrative fiction, right? But then the animals in there are pretty much doing the same kind of stunts, right? And then you start to wonder, and they're also produced by different film studios in different cities. So you start to wonder, are they actually the same animals that are just being, transported to all these different places? And if so, then that means that there is this network of animal shuttling, and basically whenever you need an animal face that can do certain stunts, you plug that animal into those places, right? So then I guess in some ways the state overdetermination is so obvious. So in my case, I sort of have to do the other direction of the work, that is to think about, under such strong-handed institutional overdetermination, then what might be the site for the pharaoh, the pharaoh that's between the wild and the domestic, and that's something that emerges out of this man-made infrastructure, but then not really being completely controlled by this infrastructural system. Yeah, so that's my side, the other side of the work that I have to do. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. All of those things, especially in your work, I think that sort of comes out that it's very much driven by policy in each of those places.
Yeah.
Sorry, does someone on the chat have a question? Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Deborah?
Okay, thank you for this wonderful panel. It's been great to listen to all of your talks. I have a general question for all three of you. As you are all working on film, I wanted to ask, what role does cinema's temporal dimension play in engaging with extinction?
If I can maybe start a little bit. I mean, I kind of touched upon this, but there's
sorry, you were muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Am I not heard? So
you're still muted.
No.
No?
I can hear Pao-chen.
Yeah, I thought I unmuted myself. No, so there is the kind of, I think what I was trying to refer to earlier, and maybe with no time to really elaborate, was that there is the kind of a tradition of how there is the, at least, according to a certain thread in classical film theory, right, the cinema animates and reanimates, right, so that there is a kind of constant negotiation of death and revival, animation, all these things coming together, right? If death is considered as a kind of a singular absolute instance in life, right, in the temporal duration, for instance, right, cinema somehow is able to sort of capture that moment and replay it constantly, right, and that's something I think maybe others could jump in, right, but from what I was suggesting earlier, there's a kind of cyclicality of that video that constantly revisit this moment of death and is unwilling to sort of let it go. And maybe in response to the previous question, there's another kind of institutional context that uses a lot of cinema media work for environmentalist purpose, which is the kind of educational setting, right? The university that we're in. When you teach, visual culture classes or literary eco-fiction classes, when you use this material, like what's the purpose and function of adopting them, right? So, think about Ursula Heiser, right, who's giving us all these way of thinking about strategies of storytelling, right? There's the more elegiac mode, there's the more tragic mode, and each of them does something. And I was really struck by, and I think this is one of the reasons why the video is so powerful for me, right? So I attended a lot of the, kind of talks by university professors on how do we mobilize all these different visual literary texts, right, to teach a student, to mobilize a student, to make them feel right in order for actions to happen, right? So the kind of the tricky part is that you can't traumatize the kids too much to the point that they are unable to sort of take any actions, right? But then you can't do it, also too much on the other way around, right? So that it becomes a kind of feel good. Everything is just a feel good. And so the idea that we could just stay with mourning, stay with the dead for perhaps continuously on the loop, right, as cinema does, is kind of appealing to me, right, in the sense that it doesn't seem to sort of jump to any sort of instrumentalized use of these, either cinema or video or any other literary text. But I think others could jump in if they want.
I don't know if we have that much time actually, so we might actually have to end there. Thank you so much to all three of you. There's so much to think about already. It's only been 1 hour in. Thank you for sharing your work with us, and we hope to see you in person soon.
Okay, cool. Great. We'll move on right away. I'm sorry to cut the previous panel short. It was very interesting. We're going to move on to the next panel, which is on marine creatures in the age of overproduction. And we have 3 PhD students, and I think they're all present. So we have Massimiliano Fantò from the University of Milan-Bicocca. Then we have Shuyang from the University of Pittsburgh, and Yafei Wang from the University of Edinburgh. So what I suggest we do is that we go in that order. So I introduce each speaker in 15 minutes. Now we're a bit strict on time, so we have some time to discuss towards the end. So if you are coming up to the end of your time, I'll send you a message and then you know that to wrap up. And then we do the questions all together at the end if that suits. We will start with Massimiliano Fantò, who's at the University of Milan-Bicocca. And Massimiliano is a PhD student in marine sciences, technology and management at the University of Milan-Bicocca. He has a BA in intercultural communication and an MA in anthropological and ethnological science. His disciplinary interests include human animal studies, animal geography, multi-species ethnography, and anthropology of science. His ethnographic research deals with the social, cultural, and political implication of invasive alien species, human-animal relations, and rhetoric on biological invasion. And I believe we're going to cover pretty much all of that in his talk, Uncontaminated or Contaminated Relationships in a Contaminated World, Human-Animal Proximities in the Era of Ecological Disenchantment. So Massimiliano, I might hand over to you.
Sorry, but I can't. Okay, now yes, fine. The presentation, okay. So thank you so much for having me. Thanks for presentation. Okay. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Deborah and Palomi and the whole organization for having me and for organizing a second day online. So thank you so much. Today's presentations aims to highlight biological invasions, looking at two cases, nutria and the blue crab, as spaces of encounter and conflict with animals within the broader context of the era of ecological disenchantment. With this term, I intend to signify a renewed critical awareness of the environmental damage. Do you hear me? Okay, caused by human actions. This recognition stems from the loss of the enchanted vision of human control over nature and the realization that our attempts to control, tame, and harm the environment often results in violent, disturbing, uncanny, so using a Freudian vocabulary, and difficult to contain repercussions, such as climate change, pandemics, and also invasion biology. Biological invasions refer to a phenomenon where a species is introduced by human action into an area different from their native habitat. In today's world, biological invasions are an increasing challenge due to global trade, transportation, and human activity spreading foreign organisms. Climate change worsens this situation by helping invasive species thrive in new areas. In response, institutions are implementing coordinated measures, such as culling and eradication project, as in my two cases, to mitigate the spread of invasive species and protect biodiversity. Speaking about biological invasions, furthermore, propels us into a complex and articulate dimension that opens a series of interesting trajectories from a social and cultural point of view. In this presentation, I intend to interpret the presence of invasive alien species not only as hypothetical subjects of contamination, drawing on the work of Mary Douglas' Purity and Danger, but also as a phenomenon and a moment of encounter and clash with an alterity, both animal and foreign. This presents an opportunity to interface with the world in a moment of significant dialogue. So some questions are, I'm asking, how do people react to the arrival of new species? And how do they cope with this presence? What elements and strategies do they employ to deal with such novelties? To address this question, I will discuss two cases involving the nutria, Myocastor caipus, and the blue crab, Callisthenes sapidus. Two animals I've been working on since my master's degree in anthropology, using more than human methods and ethnographical approach. So this the nutria is a large semi-aquatic rodent native to South America. It was imported to Europe, specifically to Italy, in 1928 for fur production. Following the decline of the fur market, there were instances of voluntary releases of this species into the wild, likely by fur company owners aiming to avoid disposal costs. This led to the establishment of the first colonies of nutria in Italy. Nutria's adaptability and suitability of new habitats facilitate their spread. Their significant environmental impact falls into four main areas. So the first one is biocenosis, agricultural, irrigation infrastructure problems, and health concerns. In Italy, nutria are often linked to migrants due to their non-native invasive nature, reflecting societal attitude toward both migrants and introduced species, merging cultural and ecological concern. The second case is the blue crab, a decapod crustacean. It likely arrived in Tunisia about 10 years ago and has since become firmly established in the Gulf of Gabes area, which is already environmentally compromised due to over-extraction, the presence of white phosphate, and waste. The blue crab poses a significant threat to biodiversity in the Mediterranean region. Its powerful claws damage fishermen's equipment and endanger native species. This crab spreads mainly through maritime traffic, likely carried in a ship's ballast water from North America. And the primary reason for its successful proliferation is the warming of the sea, what is known as tropicalization of the Mediterranean area. Despite the vast differences between the two species, they share the same terminology in scientific classification, invasive alien species. I use the term alien instead of non-native to emphasize the often violent implication of these categories in biopolitical and sociocultural contexts. The traits of nutria and the blue crabs have shaped their negative portrayal in media, culture, collective imagination, and legends. In this context, I link the creation of a fearful perception of animal otherness with the development of an emotional cultural attitude towards invasive species. Drawing from Sarah Ahmed's idea on disgust, I explore how this perception is legitimized to justify the eradication of this species. Ahmed suggests that emotions can be ingrained and influenced by prevailing narratives, with societal norms and collective engagement reinforcing feelings like disgust, leading to apathy towards their death. So, a brief anecdote recounted by one of my interviews during my ethnographic research is a useful way to address the point of this analysis. During a conference, she said, I remember a biologist complaining because slides of a park near Rome were shown, where the images of the local fauna were displayed, and there was also a nutria. To him, it was absolutely scandalous because the nutria shouldn't have been there, because the nutria should be in the park, he said. It's not possible because then there are people who feed them and there are people who find them pleasant without realizing the problems they cause, the damages they inflict on both the environment and humans. We need to eradicate them. In Italy, according to Piero Genovesi, head of the Wildlife Coordination Service, capturing and culling nutria are currently the most effective methods for population control, with other interventions like capture and release or sterilization considered ineffective, focusing on ecological management primarily through culling, often involving bloody process. So my interviews continued saying, what would the biologist have said if he had known that I have a nutria as a pet at home? During my research, I met several people who would have chosen to adopt a nutria as a pet illegally. Some of them found it injured or released by organizations that take care of them. I will present images and videos in the next few slides, and I want to make clear that I do not want to romanticize these practices. They should be analyzed in another, more appropriate context. So, some video. What interests to me is the alternative choice to care for these invasive alien species. Many interviewees speak of conscious choice and highlight the injustice that these animals have had to endure to arrive in Italy. They talk about feeling like it's a child. They take care of it, and in some cases, they adapt their home to its needs. Beyond the care and affection found in any other pet, the care of many people become aware of the rapidly changing world through this new proximity. This decision reflects a proactive approach to addressing environmental challenges and seeking creative solutions to manage the impacts of globalization and ecological interconnectedness. In a context where invasive species threaten native ecosystems, the adoption of unconventional approaches indicates a willingness to explore new perspectives for coexisting with nature. Moreover, it highlights people's capacity to overcome the constraints imposed by a widespread and violent perception that portrays dead species as dangerous and destructive. This attitude of care and affection, which in most cases detaches from an ideal of control, appears as the dialogical space where subjects engage with the violence and impact of human beings on the earth. In many interviews, there is a clear awareness of the complexity of the relationships between humans and the natural environment. Nutra are here now, and we have to live with them, someone said. In North Africa, in the meanwhile, when the blue crab Callistenus sapitus began to populate the eastern coast of Tunisia, particularly in the coast of Gabes and the Kerkena Island, it was a true catastrophe for many. Someone even called it Nakba for how its arrival changed their life. Its large claws were capable of easily destroying fishermen's net, and its relentless predation jeopardized the biodiversity of the area. The small coastal communities rename it Daesh, the derogatory term for the Islamic State, due its voracious and violent nature. Their introduction disrupts ecosystem and is widely seen as a major threat to biodiversity, impacting not only the environment, but also the economy. Indeed, the spread of the blue crab has a direct impact on the local economy, putting the sustainability of fishery resources at risk. Coastal communities which rely on fishing for sustenance now face fiercer competition from this invasive species, which shares food sources with local fish and displaces them from their habitats. To address this challenge, Tunisian authorities have adopted targeted eradication methods. Coordinated large-scale eradication efforts involving local community in population management and monitoring have been crucial, very crucial. So since 2014, a lot has changed because over the year, Tunisia has established one of the world's most significant blue crab export chains, turning the presence of this animal into an opportunity. They say dall'horreur à l'or, which means that from the horror to the gold. What someone, especially big company owners, say. The reality, however, it's not so simple. So that the presence of the blue crab has heavily weakened social cultural practices such as sharfia, which is in this image, a sustainable fishing method passed down through generations. Moreover, it has deeply entrenched semantic and heritage contestations. The subsequent establishment of an industry specialized in its management has been a significant source of conflict. This dispute has unfolded not only in the social restructuring of the community. For example, women who traditionally engaged in selling fish at local markets have been co-opted into companies earning considerably less and losing their daily routines, but also in the heritage practices related to the crab. This process, fueled by the creation of a statue, which is in the photo, later vandalized in the protest the institutionalization of an animal that has never been the symbol of the area, which was actually the octopus. And also the creation of graffiti, a festival, then publication of recipe book, all served as pretext aimed at integrating the animal into the local social fabric to exploit its potential. So just to arrive at the conclusion of my presentation, the encounter with the blue crab was disturbing and threatening. To manage it, they have used the same means through which the animal is here now, so the capitalism. While this may seem practical, it raises serious concerns. Prioritizing economic gains over environmental and social factors could worsen the problem rather than solve it. This approach might overlook the long-term impacts on biodiversity and the marine ecosystem, focusing only on short-term profits. Ultimately, capitalizing on the blue crab could harm local communities and their fishing traditions, jeopardizing their long-term economy and cultural sustainability. In conclusion, biological invasions not only represent a catastrophic alarm for the loss of biodiversity, which triggers fears for the loss of capitalist economic structures, actually, but they are also the site of new encounters and new human and non-human proximities. These proximities can be configured as generative meeting places where humans recognize their role in the ongoing change, sometimes facing these new presences creatively, like the nutria, while in other instances reproducing a paradigm of production that views animals as subjects of exploitation. These encounters underscore the complexity of our relationship with the environment and other species, urging us to reassess our attitudes towards non-human beings and ecosystems we share. Recognizing the effect of human actions on the natural world, we can aim to adopt more sustainable and ethical approaches to ecosystem coexistence. Furthermore, these encounters serve as opportunities for reflection and action. They challenge us to rethink our societal values and practices, encouraging us to develop more inclusive and responsible ways of interacting with the environment and its inhabitants. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Massimiliano, and sorry for the strict no
problem
there. You did very well for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We might move on swiftly too. So if everybody is happy to keep their questions until the end, I'm sure there are lots of questions that people would like to ask, but we can do them all together. So we will move on in that case to Shuyang Shi. And Shuyang Shi is a first-year doctoral student in the history department at the University of Pittsburgh. And she's interested in the history of animals with a particular focus on China. And before joining Pitt, she obtained an MA degree from the University of Chicago in 2020 and an MRes in the history of the books from the School of Advanced Study, University of London in 2023. And Shuyang will be talking about the final gift of the goddess of the Yangtze River, animal conservation in China after the extinction of the Yangtze River dolphin. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. And just to let you know, my cat is just a couple away from me, so you might gonna see a tail or something. Don't be super surprised. Here he is. So, and this is after all a conference on animal history. So yeah, I did not chase him out of there. So can I share my screen to show my PowerPoint?
I think you should.
Yeah, you should be able to do that. Yeah.
So I just yeah. Here it should go. So can you all see this?
Yeah, you might make it full screen if you're able to.
Okay, yes. So is anybody like seeing this fine? So I'll just jump straight to this presentation. So good afternoon or good evening from any place, since I'm in China and it's already like 10 p.m. in the night. So my name is Shuyang. So I'm from the University of Pittsburgh. Thank you so much for your wonderful introduction. So what I'm going to talking about is about animal conservation in China after the extinction of the Yangtze River dolphin. So first, let's briefly talk about, let's say, the Yangtze River dolphin. So this is the Yangtze River dolphin. That's his Latin name. And it was once revered as, so that's why I named this, let's say, the goddess of the Yangtze River, because it is directly how the Chinese people, like 2,000 years ago, called her in ancient Chinese mythology, symbolizing the river's rich biodiversity and ecological health. But despite conservatory efforts, its tragic decline through the 1980s and the eventual extinction into 2007 marked a significant loss of the Yangtze River ecological system. So this paper I want to make clear that it's not focusing on how the Yangtze River dolphin went to extinct. That has been well written by British biologist named Samuel Turvey. So this book actually talks about something after the extinction. So talking about the aftermath of this event, examining how conservatory measures implemented to protect the Yangtze River dolphin, in the end, indirectly influenced the preservation of other species within the Yangtze River. And by analyzing the intersection of technology, social welfare, and governmental policy, this study would reveal that the extinction of the Yangtze River dolphin was not merely a narrative of failure and fatalism. And here, allow me to briefly introduce like one of my methodologies. So my method, I'm more inclined because I'm trained more from a perspective of history. So this presentation will be focusing more on the, let's say, how this kind of like, even though it's the extinction is in 2007, just 17 years from now, so just 17 years of history, but still I would more focusing on how this kind of like, there are certain historical changes made because of this extinction. So let's begin. So let's first look at, well, a glimpse into the extinction of the Yangtze River dolphin. So in 1980s, before that, the 1980s, like we witnessed a huge leap forward in Chinese history about, let's say, constructions and engineering, including the building of many dams, two of them named the Sanxia and the Gezhouba, which are accounted in the end for not only the Yangtze River dolphin, but for the extinction of many other species that lived in the Yangtze River. So in 1981, the first Yangtze River dolphin celebrity was captured in central China. So, and his name was given to Qi, and that's the one written in the parentheses is the one how the Chinese name was written. And it soon became one of the most influential marine animals in China and the mascot for many sport events, which I will show you later, and even political events. So Qi died in 2002, like near almost 20 years after being loved by many Chinese marine animal preservers and fans. Yet, the construction of the Yangtze River Dam, the Sanxia Daba and the Gezhouba, that's the one I mentioned before, and overfishing in the Yangtze River depraved the local environment and food supply for Yangtze River dolphin. And in 2007, British biologist Samuel Turvey officially declared the functional extinction of the Yangtze River dolphin. So notice one thing that there is a little explanation. Functional extinction doesn't mean that there is no more species, like no single Yangtze River dolphin, like say, that swims in the Yangtze River. That's not the case. Functional extinction means that this type of species is not unable to perform its ecological niche or all those. So you can see the tail, sorry about this, or any kind of ecological purpose that this species of animals is supposed to work. So this is what we call the functional extinction. It's not a full extinction. It might still have some chance, but let's say this chance of saving the species is fairly low. And you can see from the final line of this slide that there are countless rumors saying that the Yangtze River dolphin still exists in the Yangtze River. There are many people claim they have seen some Yangtze River dolphin alive, but it has never been officially seen or academically recorded for more than a decade. So this is what happened before 2007. So here are the couple of pictures. This picture shows in 1981 the capture scene of Qi. So this is Qi himself. So you can see that he was pretty like heavily wounded, but this picture was actually used to claim to the world that China has now captured a live Yangtze River dolphin and therefore has full control of all the water sources and all the marine or water ecology of the Yangtze River dolphin and the surrounding oceanic environments, because Yangtze River dolphin is one kind of animal that travels between the river and the ocean. So, and here, this is the one that's super interesting. The woman in the left, you can see, she was, I cannot say for sure about her identity, but she was claimed or rumored to be the niece of Chairman Mao. So you can see that there was a lot of like celebrities visiting the marine exhibit, and this is Qi himself. So this particular dolphin is Qi himself. This picture was taken around like 1990s or like early 2000s, something like that. Yeah. And here is this like this cute little figure is the representation of the Yangtze River dolphin as being the mascot of the third college student athletic sport event in China, took place in 1993. Here's another one. this one is the Yangtze River dolphin made to the post stamps. So you can see there's one for 8 one, there's another for like a 60 fin that's been issued by Chinese government in recognition of the protection of the Yangtze River dolphin in around like 1980s. So yeah, I would say that even before 2007, the Yangtze River dolphin has already attracted a lot of like fans and lovers and has great social, environmental, and political significance in China. But nevertheless, it went extinct in 2007. So, but the story doesn't end here. What I want to say is that after the extinction of the Yangtze River dolphin, animal lovers in China officially mourn its spice. And by official, I mean it. Like this post stamp was issued in 1980 as a commemoration of the protection and capture of the Yangtze River dolphin who named Qi. And in 2007 and 2008, we have a reissue of this specific type of post stamp just to commemorate the extinction of the Yangtze River dolphin. So you can see this kind of significance here, and which stirs up a series of political attempts, environmental proposals, and I would say social movements. I would say amidst the sorrow, a silver lining moment emerged. So the extinction of the Yangtze River dolphin served as a wake-up call, igniting renewed interest and increased investment in animal conservation efforts. So first things first, fishing in the Yangtze River was forbidden for 10 years. So, well, this policy was actually officially came out in 2017, like 10 years after the extinction of the Yangtze River dolphin, as a way of commemorate the extinction of this specific species. And it's still, it's the forbidden in fishing, it's still on. So it will be released by 2027. And by then we can have a more like thorough idea about how does this 10 years of forbidden in fishing works. So yes, this is the first, let's say, the political control from the government side about that learned from the extinction of the Yangtze River dolphin. And also, here's comes the interesting part, is that during the preservation like measures for the Yangtze River dolphin, we actually developed a series of technological advancements, which includes first the establishment of the first aquarium in China that are able to breed marine mammals. Well, unfortunately, the Baiji or the Yangtze River dolphin failed. The breeding for Yangtze River dolphin failed, but the breeding for other type of marine mammals native to China did succeed. And that's the first thing. You can see here, so this is not Yangtze River dolphin. This is very confusing. This is Yangtze dolphin. They are different. You can see that from the snout, that the Yangtze River dolphin has a much longer snout, whereas this one is has a shorter snout. So they're different species, but they're different species with similar habits, which means the original aquarium established for the preservation of the Yangtze River dolphin, basically Qi, which like he's the only one that have lived in captivity for more than 21 years. So can also be used to protect these Yangtze dolphin. And it's actually being it's even more effective because the Yangtze dolphin, they're much smaller than the Yangtze River dolphin. So 1 pound, like one aquarium can actually, which can hold only 1 Yangtze River dolphin, can actually hold more than 5 to 6 or even a dozen of Yangtze dolphin, which greatly facilitated the breeding of Yangtze dolphin, which is also one of the species that is like on the brink of extinction. And not only this, we also developed a series of, I want to go back to this picture of Qi. You can see actually the one, like this one is apologies for the poor quality because this picture is like 40 years old now. But actually at the tail of it, you have seen that there's actually kind of like a tracking device for the Yangtze River dolphin. That's some of the first tracking device we ever have that used to track marine animals in China. So this is also a technological advancement that can be used to save other types of animals, including, for example, the Yangtze dolphin. So let's say monitoring devices, data analysis, and the restoration techniques provided valuable tools for conservationists to better understand and protect endangered species. for example, so the Yangtze dolphin, the population of Yangtze dolphin rised up from around like 500 to 1,000, around 500 to 1,000 to a staggering number of 50,000 in just 10 years after the extinction of the Yangtze River dolphin. So I would say this is some kind of remarkable achievement. And those protections are made, and that's why I named this abstract the name as that's a final gift of the goddess of the Yangtze River, because the Yangtze River dolphin went extinct, but many of these kinds of animal conservation, like methods, policy, environmental approaches, and including like technological advancements and all these like conservatory experiences, facilitated the protection of the population of many other animal species that lived in the Yangtze River. So that's why I named my abstract in that way. And here is actually this one picture taken on, I don't know if you can see the number, like the date down there. It's actually August 7, 2006, just after the, a couple of years after the death of Si-ji. So this pond is the first aquatic environment that we simulated to protect the Yangtze dolphin. And that's the place also where the first Yangtze dolphin baby, which is the one on the picture, was born in 2007. So I would say that, so for here, heading for the conclusion, I want to make very clear of this. I'm definitely not romanticizing the extinction of Yangtze River dolphin, nor am I opposing the narrative of Samuel Turvey, who beautifully wrote about the tragic extinction of the Yangtze River dolphin. The book of him, I'll include his book at the end of this slide. So the extinction is undoubtedly a huge devastation to the local ecological environment. But I would like to say that the extinction is not the end of the story. So the extinction story of the Yangtze River dolphin offers essential lessons for broader conservation strategies. And it emphasizes the need for a more holistic and integrated approach that covers the interconnectedness of species with their ecological environments. So what I want to try to argue and try to do in this paper, in this project, is to consider and question the subject of extinction studies. I don't know if one of you have heard of this book on extinction studies, edited by Deborah Bird Rose, Tom Venderen, and Matthew Schruliu. They are the three. So extinction studies is one of the emerging studies in the history of animals that look on the how, let's say the historical consequences of extinction, how we define extinction, and how we understand extinction. So in the book Extinction Studies, which here is the further reading, you can see here, the one on the third line, Extinction Studies, Stories of Time, Death, and Generation. So in this book, Tom Venderen actually brings up this interesting point about the consideration of extinction. So first things first, when we define an extinction, we mostly would say that that's the end of a species. So extinction studies must first be intertwined with certain species, and then we can analyze how the species failed to survive or being influenced by historical changes in human history. For example, in this case of the Yangtze River dolphin, one huge part of its extinction is caused by the establishment of major dams on the Yangtze River for the sake of environmental and energy and extraction of natural resources and energy. But we also need to consider, where should we end in studying the extinction event of certain animals? Should we end by the time that this animal went extinct, or should we go further to investigate not only the extinction event, but also the repercussion of the extinction event, and how does these repercussions in turn facilitated or exacerbated the extinction or the conservation of other type of animals? So this is what I tried to do in this paper. And here is a little bit of the further reading by, so first things first, there's a beautiful book by Samuel Turvey that writes about Witness to Extinction, how we failed to save the Yangtze River dolphin. That's basically the whole, that beautifully articulates the whole story of the extinction of the Yangtze River dolphin and the story of Si-ji as well. And other historiographies, I would like to introduce a couple of them on marine animals in Chinese history, including Michael Muscolino's Fishing Wars and Environmental Change in Late Imperial and Modern China, and Toby Mayer-Phone's recent research. She's still working on that. That book will be coming about around 2025 or something, on the Zhoushan Peninsula, which is also close to the habitat of the Yangtze River and the Yangtze River dolphin. And this book on the extinction studies and extinction's history, politics, and social impact is the one that I would like to engage with. And I would not say the word challenge, but I would say that this event, this paper, actually, I would say offers one interesting insight into not only the extinction of animals, but also the repercussion of the extinction, and to investigate all these social, environmental, and political impacts of the extinction of a celebrity species. So this is, I would say, this is my presentation. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for having this kind of online event. Thank you. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to all your questions.
Thank you very much, Shuyang. We will move swiftly on to the third talk and the final talk in this panel, and that is by Yafei Wang at the University of Edinburgh. And Yafei is a PhD student in architecture and architectural landscape at the University of Edinburgh. Yafei adopts an interdisciplinary approach merging critical landscape studies, environmental humanities, modern human methods, and ethnographic research. Is informed by queer theory, hydrofeminism, philosophy, and visual anthropology, and investigates the fluid boundaries between humans and fish. And Yafei's research centers on two specific local contexts, which we're going to hear about in this paper, which is Si-ji-mei in China. I believe that's the Wuhan Huanan Seafood Market, and Shetland in Scotland. And it examines the anthropocentrism through the interplay of humans, non-humans, foodscapes and ocean landscapes in fishing communities and markets. I'm going to leave it to Yafei to talk about this more. So yeah, the floor is yours if you want to share your slides or anything.
Yeah, thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay, everyone can see my screen and hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Let's begin. Okay.
You might make it full screen as well, if that's okay.
Yeah. Is that okay? Is that the first screen?
It's currently still on the PowerPoint.
Okay. Right. I already choose the first screen.
Okay. I can still see it in the browser, so it's quite small for me at the moment.
That's weird. Okay, let me try again. Sorry for that. Oh,
that's perfect. Yeah, that works.
Okay, wonderful. Hi, everyone. I'm Yafei. I'm very grateful to UCD for organizing this conference, which allows me as a very young scholar to share my ideas with you all at the early stage of my research project. My research project is called When Species Meet in Life and Dies, Ecologies of Dies in Seafood Market, a study of Si-ji-mei, which is Wuhan Huanan Seafood Market search and shortland fishing community. I'm sorry that the name is too long, but to put it simply, I'm mainly focused on commodified fish, and my research project explore how to know fish, how do human and more than human participate in academic research, why work with non-human and more than human, and how to work with them. One of my research site is in Wuhan, China, and the other is in Shetland. These two sites have very rich fishery resources, but their fishery resources, the environment is totally different. One of them belong to like the freshwater fish resources, and the other one belong to seawater fishery resources. Since I haven't started the field research yet. I'm going to focus on today on the commodification of fish itself. And in the last part of my presentation, I'm going to use a kind of performance presentation way. Invite you all to join me on a derived journey. First of all, we can break down the commodification process of fish from being caught to being served on the table. From this figure, we can find that non-human diets appear in every step of the commodification process and participates in every step of space production, proving once again that space itself is part of the process of the capitalism and the commodification. In addition, the nature of space is affected by animal liveness. The market environment has both performance and temporal qualities, which is influenced by the customer's demands for animal. For example, due to the different habits, consumer in some area want to buy very, very fresh fish. So the speed of the selling fish in the market will be very fast under this demand, and this demand will also be reflected in the market spatial planning. For example, live fish will be placed in the nearest place to the market export. Throughout this process, as long as the fish do not lose their lives, they have the possibility of escaping commodification if they are lucky. But once life is lost, it's destined to be commodified and even continue to be commodified. Therefore, the death of fish is a very important event in the process of commodification. And the death of the commodified fish is to a specific time and space is an ongoing process. We may have a better understanding of the complex dynamic spatial patterns in the diet space if we can identify the fluidity of the link between diet and space from the death events in the multi-landscape nodes of the commodified fish. And it was stems from concerns about the commodification of fish. In the process of the commodified fish, death is not the end. Just like I said before, after they die, the bodies continue to be commodified. What happened when we turn attention to their bodies? I think the most important thing is that it will give us a perspective to understand the situation that fish and the place built together in a dehumanized way. When I focus on the body of the fish, I discovered the vesicle piscus, which can be interpreted as fish bubble. You can clearly see the shape of fish in these two intersecting circles. The vesicle piscus is basically the mother of all geometric patterns, from which derives the Celtical knot, as well as the proportion calculation of the Gothic architectural arcades. So the non-human, like fish, intervention into our world is much deeper than we realize. In this regard, guided by feminism theories, criticise study, and co-labor ethnographic practice method combined with differentiated participatory research written by Michel Bastien, her teams, I plan to develop a practice-based research method called triangular profiling. This approach involves the participation of researchers, non-academics, and modern humans, who can contribute their collective knowledge and experience together. Each species contributes fragments of its own perspective to construct situation knowledge in critically fabrication way. The method was inspired by vesicle piscus and a method of recreating suspect in criminal investigations, I conceive of the fish as the unknown X, and through the fragment of each species' contributions, we can know X more. And this similar stable triangular structure comes from fish bubbles too. Bodies and space construct each other in complex and nuanced ways. Also, the specific reasons are not clear right now, but conceptualizing space also tend to use group of 3 elements, like I showed from the slide. So if you know the reasons, just let me know. It's really important for me. And for now, anyone please feel relaxed. I'm going to put on my fish mask and take you on a short derived journey. During the whole process, if you feel any uncomfortable, please stop at any time. You can look at me from the small screen, or you can look at my share screen. And please prepare a piece of paper and a pen, and just wait 1 minute. Let me wear my face mask.
So let's start right now. Take 2 deep breaths and think of the supermarkets, convenience stores, and fish shops that you know, like, or remember the most. Imagine you're standing in front of this store and think about the fish-related items you're going to pick up. Write it on your paper. Now, when you walk into the store, take a little more time than usual to think about the product from many angles. Please choose your current mood and write it down. Now that you have a little more time, think about its origin, its material, its taste, its shape, and the scene you expect to use it in. Pay attention to everything you see and hear. Now please choose your mood again. If you have more ideas, you can also write them down. Finally, let us all say thank you, fish.
Okay, welcome back. And that's what I want to share today. And tomorrow I will go offline. Looking forward to further discussions with you all. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much, Yafei. That was really interesting, and it reminds me of I grew up visiting fish factories a lot through some weird quirk in my family, and it reminds me of going there and very often being a bit on the fence whether the fish there were actually alive or dead, which is a strange sort of realization to have. Looking back as a child, you often didn't know what was going on quite. So yeah, very interesting. I would like to invite all three participants, Yafei, Massimiliano, and Shuyang, to, you're all here already with cameras. I want to begin by just opening up the floor and see if anyone has any questions, either for individual presenter or all three together, which I can also imagine. Does anyone want to go and ask any questions? You can just unmute, maybe turn on your camera if you can, and unmute yourself and fire away.
May I have a question for Yafei, actually?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for your presentation. I really loved it. And I'm just curious, have you ever read about the book by David Eagler about the Great Ocean and the World Hunt by the commodification and the environmental history of commodification of animals? So these two books talks very hugely extensively about the capture of marine animals. And one thing in The Great Ocean by David Eagler is that he says the transportation boat is not only a transportation tool, but also a manufacturing place for which the living animal like a seal or whale or sea otter or even polar bear are being manufactured into products like whale oil, whale blubber, seal blubber, things like that. So I wonder, what is your opinion towards this kind of notion, and how does that relate to your research on the, is that Si-ji-mei, am I pronouncing that correctly? The Si-ji-mei seafood market.
Yeah, well, you give me a lot of reference, thank you. Yeah, and I want to say, because I choose these two sites, they have different fishery resources, like I said before, most because people have different eating habits. Like in Wuhan, people prefer to choose freshwater fish, but for many people, especially I meet in United Kingdom, they don't like eat freshwater fish. They even don't know what's that. Yeah, so, but I think they all belonging to like the whole water system. So I think choose these two sides, it's meaningful. Yeah. So, and the things I want to do, just like I want people spend more time shifting our attention to animals, no matter it's the marine animals or land animals, yes. And pay attention to the details of lives, because whether they are non-human or more than human, they do not communicate with us in the way we are familiar with. So, and this is why I choose use the triangular profiling way to resolve these kind of questions. I hope we can use the or things like the word tools we can use to know more about fish from like the non-human and the more than human, their testimony to know these things. Yeah.
Does anyone else want to jump in with any questions? Deborah?
Speaking. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I have a question for Shuyang. Well, first of all, thank you all three for your wonderful papers. The question I have for Shuyang was, you mentioned that one of the positive outcomes of the extinction of the Yangtze river dolphin was technological advancements. And I was wondering if you also see a possible future from this point onwards where the Yangtze River can be a self-sustaining environment, not needing the interference or surveillance by humans in order to thrive, or these kind of tanks to reproduce or have breeding programs, etc.
Thank you so much for this, and I really love this question because first. So first things first, this project is actually inspired by reading a book called, I'll let you know the name. It's called Wired Wilderness. That is a book by Professor Etienne Benson that talks about the history of the development of tracking technology in the United States. So, and then I move on to the tracking technology in the Yangtze River, and then I see this whole thing. So, but unfortunately, I totally understand the concern of yours. And unfortunately, I have to say that even though there has been a 10-year forbidden for fishing policies that won't be ending until like 2027, I'm not very confident about the situation in the Yangtze River. I am not that confident. Well, I am confident that there might be some positive changes, but I'm not super confident that the Yangtze River, the ecological environment of the Yangtze River and its surrounding like provinces, like land-based provinces and oceanic environments, can be completely free from human interference. I don't think that's gonna happen. Yeah. So yes, and I would say that this human interference is something that's pretty common, and that is nothing to be, let's say, blamed off for having human interference. I would just say that for the status quo of the Yangtze River, I do not foresee such a future for, let's say, a foreseeable, let's say, time. Yeah.
Thanks, Shuyang. Anyone else wants to jump in with a question? Otherwise, I will. I might have a question for all three of you, but I might ask it to Massimiliano first. Well, I was inspired by what Yafei was talking about, where you brought in the triangular profiling as a sort of conceptual, extrapolating beyond the immediacy of the fish and extrapolating it for sort of a method or a sort of a conceptual step beyond that to think about maybe ethics of care and ethics of knowing. It strikes me, Massimiliano, especially the species you were talking about, because it came up, as you mentioned, that some people take them in as pets, especially the nutria. Is it possible in the case of the nutria and the blue crab to do something similar, to sort of extrapolate beyond those immediate situations and think about sort of ethics of care and ethics of knowing, and what does that mean? Is there something we can learn from the situation with the nutria and the blue crab in those specific regions, or is it sort of an extremely, I know it is a very complex situation with a lot of different dimensions, but could you reflect on that a little bit, on sort of that extrapolating beyond the immediacy of that situation in terms of caring and knowing?
So sorry, but unfortunately I lost you for a sec, so I don't understand the last part of your questions. Can you please,
It was very lengthy. That's my bad. No, I was thinking, I was struck by what Yafei said about this issue, is extrapolating beyond sort of the immediacy of the fish and using the triangular profiling as a sort of conceptual method to think further. Can we do something similar with the nutria and the blue crab, especially because there is such a practice of care that emerges from having a nutria as a pet, for instance, in all ways that come with that?
I don't know, honestly. I'm so sorry about that, to move to the room because so there's quite noisy here. But actually, first of all, I want to clarify that my research is totally ethnographical research. So because I'm an anthropologist, I've been working on that since 2020. And yeah, my bibliographical reference and my books are, I'm not seeing the mushroom at the end of the world, because my perspective is very new materialistic perspective, because I'm looking at the economic, especially for the blue crab. It's very interesting to analyze how the arrival of these new species change a lot the local community, but also the international system, because they create a new interconnection, transnationality, etc. About your question, actually, yes, I can have a more, conceptual, I don't know, maybe I understood well, but looking at the case of the pet, it's quite difficult to analyze that situation, because first of all, it's illegal. So person actually, people that decided to have a pet as a nutria as a pet, they don't you know came out and coming out with this. But I don't know about your question. Actually, it's something that I have to think about, because it's quite interesting to analyze how care and affection create a new sort of relationships and proximities. I know that I don't respond to your question, but it's something that I have to think.
It's something I think it's a very complex sort of situation, right? With all the dimensions that you, it being illegal and it being an invasive species, yet there being a sort of a caring relationship there.
Consider that the most interesting to me in the case of the nutria is that these new relationships is a sort of mirror in which this person can face themselves as as humans. I mean, like the point of the eco-globalization and the ecological interconnectedness. So it's something very interesting, this dialogue between the species, these invasive species, which is very, in Italy is like a monster, a migrant, etc. Something contaminated. So this person decided to have a coipo as a pet. Is a sort of, I don't know, moment of dialogue with the otherness in general.
No. Thank you, Massimiliano. Yeah. Is there anyone, I think we have room for one final question if anyone has a burning question, and otherwise we will start to wrap up. So
time, so I will I'll skip some and then we can discuss it in the Q&A session. Okay, Okay. Hello, everyone. First of all, I sincerely thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this conference. The paper I'm presenting today is a part of my PhD dissertation, and it is still ongoing process. So, so your comments and feedback are most welcome. Keeping in mind the time constraint you have just mentioned, I'm going to share some thoughts that I have gathered from the text in the backdrop of the theme of this panel, that is the narrating animals in literary works. The Stride of the White Tusker, set in present-day Sonitpur district of Assam, engages with one of the most difficult problems in the northeastern state of India, the deadly contest for living space between...
Just 15 minutes only.
Between the pachyderm and the subaltern human beings. Just one clip, I'll again skip some of it. This is from Sonitpur district. And it is graphic. I mean, I must have that. It is graphic, but this is a reality in my state now. It's a daily affair. The novel is interesting, not simply because it addresses the ongoing human-elephant conflict, but also because it represents a complex form of special entanglement between the human and the elephant in Assam. I argue Goswami's novel is a literary representation of what Pierce Locke terms as ethno-elephantology, stemming from the complexities and interconnections between the human and the elephant. In South Asia, Locke's multi-species interdisciplinary approach invites us to look at the Asian elephant not in isolation from the human, but rather to focus on this historically dynamic relation in which both the human and the elephant co-evolved, particularly in relation to issues of coexistence and conflict. In this setting, the boundaries are intersecting and often overlapping. The novel evokes this kind of threading through the human and the elephant worlds and suggests how life is constituted and co-constituted in post-colonial era. It is a historiographic metafiction that presents the entangled environmental and political history of post-colonial Assam and addresses the relationship between the human-elephant conflict and the struggle of the landless indigenous communities, as well as the immigrants from erstwhile East Pakistan, present-day Bangladesh, to survive on a contested land. With frequent multiple historical and intertextual references, long passages with colonial and native accounts, and news report construct almost half of the plotline. In so doing, Goswami's novel provides a comprehensive historiographic narrative and balancing between fictional and historical events, and thereby invites the reader to redefine and re-examine the current political ecological debates in the state. Straight of the White Tusker concerns with fractious relations of interspecies conflict, the vanishing tradition of elephant taming intertwined with the issues of immigration and identity transformation in the state. Set between 1950 and 2010, the novel consists of 3 distinct but interwoven narratives told, but then the first narrative is told from the perspective of an Assamese Mahmud Mohendro. And then the other two, it is other two by a former villager turned politician, and the third narrative is of a forester. Concerned, again, because of the time constraint, I'll just focus on the first narrative. Concerned with tamed elephants, in the first narrative, the reader bears witness to a village boy named Mohendro's life story. His transformation from being a household servant to becoming a renowned Pandi or elephant catcher in the state. The relation between the protagonist and 2 male elephants, Joy Bahadur and Pawan, constitutes its core. Towards the end, the owner's family loses both elephants. Joy Bahadur meets a tragic death due to forceful extraction of his tusks by ivory poachers. Pawan, on the other hand, is declared rogue by the forest department, receives a shooting order, but Mohendro saves him, and in the end, the elephant returns into the wild. The plotline is shaped by the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, the first comprehensive legislation in post-colonial India that categorized species on the basis of their charisma and the threats they faced. The elephant, viewed by the Indian elites, integral to the country's biological and cultural identity, is put in Schedule 1, or the highest category of protection, in 1977. Before that, elephants were protected under Schedule 2 that granted elephants the status of special game, for which it could be killed, captured, or traded commercially under license. As the narrative progresses, the reader encounters how this new elevated status not only effectively banned the systematic capturing of wild elephants, but also the pachyderm could now be caught or killed only if it had become dangerous to human life or sick beyond recovery. While the elephant has become the flagship species of the state-sponsored conservation, they are to be tolerated by the rural population living around the conservation islands or the protected areas, as the crop depredation and human-elephant conflict were no longer issues to be managed through hunting or capturing. Furthermore, a blanket ban on all kinds of commercial logging in the Northeast in 1996 brings the entire logging industry at a complete halt. This eventually makes Mohendro and other Mahouts, along with the captive elephants, jobless, as you can see in this picture. This is one of the elephants from my hometown, and jobless, and this overnight transformation renders their disposition by the owners due to the high maintenance cost without any viable income. Meanwhile, the human-elephant conflict is high in the state. The contest over limited resources and the rapid-scale destruction of the elephant corridors turns the once human-elephant encounters into human-elephant confrontation, causing ever-increasing human-elephant casualties. The latter part of the novel tells how the elephant reserves in Assam have become isolated and are basically unsustainable for the remaining population of the wild elephants. Simultaneously, it also points out the fraught colonial legacy that still haunts the elephant and wildlife conservation projects in post-colonial India. While the conservation was certainly a right step, the plight of the rural peasants did not receive any attention. The novel does not offer any viable solution, but rather shows the elephant and the rural poor both as equal victims of fraught political system and state corruption. It leaves some ray of hope through Mohenjo's decision to fight for the welfare of the elephant and the elephant caretakers through awareness events. In the novel, the mahout emerges as the most complete representative of the Assamese society, the least contaminated by foreign influence, and the most in touch with the society's recent past as a part of the rural poor. Mohenjo's narrative introduces the reader with the secret lives of the elephant riders of Assam. A close look at Kipling's To My of the Elephants gives us some hint, although to the best of my knowledge, no study has looked specifically at this dimension in the text. You can see here, while the old Tumai nostalgically remembers the plains with brick elephant lines, the Assamese catchers and hunters stay in the jungle year in and year out. In old Tumai's context, the mahout is a respectable position because he is not a mere hunter. In contrast, all Assamese literary texts show the mahout or the elephant rider is not the ultimate status. It's always evolving. It's always becoming a Fandi or an elephant catcher. So in this novel too, with narrative progression, Mohenjo gradually elevates from a mahout to a Pandi and ultimately becoming a Bor Fandi or a chief elephant catcher. And I'm using the term mahout in this paper because people outside Assam are not really I assume not very familiar with the term Pandi. So that is basically used for Melasikar or noosing the elephant, like unlike the stockade system, Kerasikar. Although the colonizers harnessed the elephant power for capturing elephants, they had to rely solely on the Pandis and their elephants. In the novel, the Dhura or the jungle elephant depot emerges as a place where catchers from across caste, tribe, and religion gather and worship the unnamed deity of the jungle. At this stan or the place of worship, no specific rule is followed, no priest is needed. It transcends one's own religion. The Muslim mahout drinks liquor as an offering, and the Hindu mahout Mohenjo takes Allah's name for success. There is one, of course. Okay. In contrast, in the human realm, the reader is told about the growing ethnic tensions and dirty politics in the state through the other two narratives, while the rural poor from indigenous and immigrant backgrounds are exploited by the political system. In this wild space, they become only mahouts and Fandis. In their village life too, they do not fight over religion or ethnic identity. Now I come to the representation of the elephant in the text. The elephant Pao-chen in the novel is represented two ways. First, as a tamed elephant, and second, as a rogue. Nevertheless, in either case, it is presented as a mighty representative of authority, embodiment of wildness, and also of death and danger. The elephant is an actor in the narrative, but it does not act like humans. Instead, it acts as an autonomous living being, influences crucial moments in the plotline, sometimes with its mere presence, sometimes with its trunk, and sometimes by trampling someone to death. With its behavior and action, Pao-chen changes and disrupts the development of the actions of the humans. The author develops an empathy with the human protagonist Mohenjo's view of the animal and presents a situation as if the mahout could look into the inside of the elephant, and simultaneously the author strictly avoids a human analog view of the animal. Based on a vivid description of mahout-elephant relationship, the narrative reposits anthropocentrism and acknowledges the limitations of human cognition rather than the limitations of non-human animal. Taking its non-anthropomorphic nature into consideration, I argue the novel can be read as a counterpart to the conventional genres widely used in animal literature with uninhibited anthropomorphism. When the human protagonist tells the forest officials, you can see in this, on the slide, that the elephant returned after killing his keeper during its must phase because it wanted human company. The drunkard keeper could not figure out this biological phase and fell victim to it. On the other hand, the elephant's sudden aggression towards his former owner is left with no explanation. At this very moment, one encounters what John Berger calls the abyss of non-comprehension between the human and the non-human animal. The behavior hints that side of the animality which is yet to be known to human mind. Edith Stein's concept of sensual empathy might shed some more light in understanding the understanding author's strategy for his elephant narrative and animal suffering. Stein's hypothesis suggests a sensing in a foreign body through which knowledge of suffering in another body is possible. In the novel, the strongest animal representation emerges in the form of elephant suffering. Individual tame elephant as well as a species in the verge of extinction. In the politics of men, the pachyderms do not count because they do not vote, says one forest officer. The author does not hesitate to accept that capturing and taming the wild elephant, irrespective of the method used, is a traumatic and violent one. And at times, the elephant shows its displeasure. Its keepers bear the brunt of its anger. Pao-chen's life is endangered when it kills its new abusive drunkard keeper, and eventually, the elephant is declared rogue. On the other hand, as a powerful, intelligent animal, the elephant begins to kill random drunkard villagers. The forest department declares it rogue and issues a shooting order. In contrast, the elephant comes to Mohendro at night and Mohendro realizes the brutal wounds on the elephant's leg inflicted by villagers. Mohendro secretly treats the elephant and later sends him back into the jungle where the elephant belongs. I'm in my last phase now. Remarkably, the elephant narrative critically questions the colonial notion of rogue elephant that continues to exist till date. An attentive look at the Assamese literary production on elephants shows how this colonial concept is being put into question in every narrative through the perspective of its handler. This novel does not claim that violent elephants do not exist, but rather it argues the reader to look at the context that turns the elephant into aggressive animals. While the forest department declares any lone male elephant as rogue, or gunda, the Hindi term for villain, the protagonist uses the Assamese terms such as Akolkoria Hati, or lone elephant, or Dolsara, one who has left the herd. Although this distinction does not deny the possibility of an aggressive male elephant, it still leaves space to avoid misinterpretation of the human-elephant conflict. In the novel, through the human protagonist's interactions with multiple elephants, the author suggests the elephant can be violent, but the violence is understood as measured and just, and either in self-protection or in protection of its family, and not because the elephant feared nothing or desired blood and attacked without provocation. My last paragraph. In his essay, Why Look at Animals, John Berger argues that metaphors have gradually supplemented real animals, heightening alienation between humans and animals in modernity. He gives the example of the urban stranger looking at zoo animals. While it can be understood as one single instant where the looking takes place, the zoo as a space for such encounters still points out its historical trajectory as a space for captive animals. In Goswami's novel, one sees how representation of the elephant is always historical as well as cultural. Centering on Berger's concept, Nigel Rothfels concludes his essay, Why Look at Elephants? Why look at elephants? Because elephants are easy to see. Stride of the White Tusker, I argue, goes one step further and tells the reader elephants are easy to see, and so are their graveyards. There is nothing mysterious regarding the elephant graveyard. It is the entire state of Assam that serves as one now. The novel indicates a grim reality with the disappearing elephants from the Assamese society, with species extinction, as well as from our minds. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamín. Amazing presentation. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, but think about them, and we are going to go to the second presenter. Christine Khan, UNE, is a PhD candidate at the Department of English, City University of Hong Kong, with a master's in TESOL. Her research interest includes the significance of interdependency between narratology in animal literature and an interdisciplinarity, I beg your pardon, of modern-day animal discourses. Her current research aims to reveal the significance of young adult animal narratives in expanding dialogues of animal discourse beyond the scholarly community. Christine, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So let me share my screen with you. Okay, so can everyone see my PowerPoint? Okay, good. All right, so my research deals with the junction between animal studies, narratology, and also disability studies, and that will also be the focus of my presentation today. So my presentation will be divided into three major sections. The first one would be a theoretical background to disability studies and how non-human animals fit into that particular dialogue. The second section will consist of a close analysis of Doglands by Tim Willock, which I'll give a short summary of later on before I do the analysis. And the third part will have I'll give a little bridging between what is identified from the story to contemporary life. So the aim of my research is to unravel the significant extent of which narratological elements, so things including like setting, plot, characterization, so how these elements can be utilized to provide a very concrete platform for people to debate and question one's understanding of non-human disability. So to start with, here is a very short theoretical background to disability studies, and I would like to start off with two definitions of what disability is. So the first one is taken from the organization Disabled People's International, DPI. So this is an older definition from 1986. Okay, so this one, it makes a very clear distinction between two concepts. One is impairment and another is disability. So in this definition, impairment is defined as the functional limitation within the individual, which is caused by physical, mental, or sensory impairments, while disability is the loss or limitation of opportunities to take part in the normal life of the community on an equal level with others because of physical and social barriers. On the other hand, the second definition I've pulled up is from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. So this is a more recent definition from the 2020, and it combines the two elements which I've just talked about. So it defines disability as any condition of the body or mind, so impairment, that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities and to interact with the world around them. So these two definitions clearly show that there's a transition between how we understand disability as a community. But what I really want to bring out with this is there is a hidden assumption behind both of these definitions, and that is that a fully functional life can only be achieved if certain criterions are met. And this assumption is hidden behind both of these definitions. And therefore, I think this poses two very important questions, which I hope to talk about later on or discuss in relation to the novels. The first one is, why are certain characteristics inherently considered an impairment or disability? And the second one is, why would certain human prototypes, so including those of moral subjectivity or associated capabilities, why would they qualify one as being disabled or not? So I think these two are very important questions that thread through my research. And in response to this, I would like to make reference to disability aesthetics, which is put forward by Tobin Sabers. So in talking about disability aesthetics, Tobin Sabers thinks that disability plays a very central role in aesthetic judgment. So in this, he's talking about artwork, he's talking about representations of art. But I think there's a very interesting point here where he talks about how aesthetics affects the way that some bodies feel according to another body. So if we look at these two images here, so the one on the left, Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man, the one on the right, Annie Jones, the Bearded Girl. So these two are actual people. They exist in the 18th century, and they were perceived as freaks of nature because they were disabled in some sense, or they were not, identical to what people believe as being normalcy or normal human beings. And Tobin Sabers, in this sense, he thinks that aesthetics elicits emotional responses, which are a mix of both conscious appreciation, which is voluntary, as well as immediate emotional impact, which is involuntary. So in this sense, someone who looks at this picture, for example, especially in the past, if they look at this picture, they may think, oh, this person does not look like a normal human being, and therefore they may feel discomfort, possibly. Okay, so this is maybe an involuntary response. But of course, in contemporary society, we know this may be due to some particular medical condition, or we're more accepting of different deformities. There's no, we're more skeptical of what is considered normal. So we also have this kind of voluntary conscious appreciation of different beings. And this, I think, also can be carried over to non-humans. So I'll term this as non-human aesthetics. So I think the public's categorization of non-human animals is also in a degree affected by aesthetics, or the extent of which one resembles two different categories of beings. So the first one is how much they resemble a normative human. So how much they look like a human. So I think most people will find a monkey here resembles a human more than a cockroach or a spider. Yep. Because aesthetically they look more like a human than the insects here, or even the snake or the fish. But I think the aesthetics here is also tied to the human's perception of them. So if we similarly have two monkeys, one which is able-bodied, which looks like this, we think, oh, they are more aesthetically pleasing. But if we see another monkey, maybe who is deformed by birth, with two heads, with one extra limb, or no legs, we feel less aesthetically pleasing when we see them, because they don't fit humans' perception of them. And this in turn leads to judgments of disqualification. And what disqualification means is an exclusion from what we call the normative human community. And what this does is this puts them at a risk of unequal treatment, bodily harm, and maybe even death, because we do not categorize them as a part of normative human community. And this also makes them subjects of oppression and violence. And with this, I would like to put that in context with the reading that I'm doing. So Doglands by Tim Willock. So a little bit about the novel. So the novel is narrated from an animal's perspective. So it's narrated from a dog called Virgo, who is a greyhound mix, who was born at a breeding facility. And it consists of 23 chapters, 322 pages. It's a crossover novel, so it's aimed at young adult audiences. And it consists of 3 parts. So the book is sectioned into 3 different sections. And my examples below will come from the first section of the book. So the first one third of the book. So I would like to go through kind of these phrases here. So if you could take a quick look through these phrases. So these phrases are extracted from the first page regarding the setting of the story or the novel. So from the first page of chapter 1. And you can see here, prison camp, boots and teeth and chains, filthy troves of grub. Okay, so all these descriptions definitely give us a very negative impression of the setting of the story. And perhaps in your minds, you'll think of something that looks like this, or maybe even like this. Okay, so these are very depressing images to have at the start of a book. And of course, these images do not come from the book itself. So these images are of real life conditions of greyhound exploitation in different parts of the world. But going back to the novel, the setting here, if we look only at the descriptions here, we can already see the very vivid description of how the conditions are disabling Virgo and his fellow greyhounds because they're being bred and held captive in such an environment. And I think this not only gives us a very vivid image or a vivid scenario of what is happening in these greyhound facilities, but it also gives us a largely contrastive scenario of the free-roaming nature of the wildlife ancestors compared to these greyhounds, which are bred in the facility. And more importantly, I think, is that it raises this question. So are they disabled in the sense, or are they made disabled? Because in these particular settings, so in this description we've seen earlier, we see that they're confined in small cages against their will. So they lose their will to their movement or their freedom to move around. They're forced to breed and feed. So they lose a lot of their natural rights as a living being. So in this sense, are they actually made disabled by humans? So therefore, a lot of researchers actually think an animal's perceived vulnerability and dependency on humans should not be a reason to devalue one's life, because oftentimes, especially in domesticated animals or in captive animals, it may be humans that lead them to particular states which seem to make them disabled. And in addition to that, in terms of setting, the author uses a kind of narrative pace and also a very common opening. So before the descriptions I've shown you just now, the chapter actually starts with the phrase "once upon a time." So this is a very conventional fairy tale opening, and it kind of creates a sense of familiarity, calmness, and peace. We often see this with, children's storybooks, okay? And we often, we think that it's going to be a very good story, a very soothing, comforting story. But of course, we can see that it contrasts very vividly with what we've seen just now regarding the descriptions, regarding the environment that Virgo lives in. And of course, the first few lines do briefly introduce the first week of Virgo's life. So feeding on his mother's milk, reliving in the false sense of security that his family provides. But then the pace evidently quickens. So the author here uses this kind of narrative pace to complement how Virgo develops. So this only contributes the first 4 to 5 lines of the chapter before going into the description that I've shown you earlier. So the horrendous description of the facility. So I think this vivid contrast with the main story, it complements the sense of urgency and the approaching doom in which the characters are experiencing. And more importantly, the impacts of human actions on depriving the hounds or the dogs of a natural and dignified life. So I think this utilization of narratological features in this sense actually enhances our understanding of how we're affecting different types of non-human species. And I think this is also reflected on by the naming of the characters. So hounds, greyhounds, moots are referred to as the dogs are referred to as these kind of names, whereas the humans were referred to as masters. So this already shows a very clear kind of contrast between the power relations behind the two categories. And even in the description of characters, we see, for example, hungry, frightened, and sad hounds as opposed to the harsh, angry, and mean masters. There's no justice here in Dead Bones Hole, so that's the greyhound facility. We haven't done anything wrong, while the humans were bullies who thought it was fun to feel so powerful. So all these descriptions and naming of characters actually foreshadow the discussions of dominance and speciesism in the book. And of course, also the power dynamics, where there's the dominant and the oppressed category in the book. So I'm, in view of time, I'm going to skip through this PowerPoint. Okay, so just very quickly to bridge the story to real life. So of course, the book itself, I think, is a clear glimpse into a myriad of anthropocentric ideologies. And I can't go into detail of all of them, but I will go and discuss one of them. So I think, but before that, I think one of the important points we need to keep in mind is that although an animal narrative uses a first-person non-human characters as the central mouthpiece, the story is ultimately told by a human, and therefore it actually reveals a lot more about the human than the non-human that it attempts to portray. And I think this is true of all books, as they are ultimately written by a human author. So supply and demand, I think, is one of the major ones we can really identify with in contemporary society. So being a dominant factor in determining the extent in which society marginalizes and oppresses animals. So, for example, in this book, Normalization and Popularity of Greyhound Racing as Entertainment. So racers are, in this case, are justifiably commodified in the money-making business, stripped of identity. They became mere objects for profits and money-making, and in extension, subjects of oppression. So I think these are all different anthropocentric ideologies that we can perceive from the narratology of books, such as the one I've talked about just now. So just to quickly conclude, I think just as Tobin Sabers challenges all these traditional notions of aesthetics, I think by appreciating the differences between species as being illustrated by narratological features in contemporary animal narratives, which are not often being discussed in the academic community, I think we're prompt to reconsider the norms in which we perceive as being normal, and also to recognize the richness of individuality and diversity, which leads to a more inclusive understanding of our non-human counterparts. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. Fascinating presentation. Indeed, we don't pay much attention to young adult literature. So while now we need to go to our last paper for the day. So the presenter is Mohamed Louza. Mohamed Louza has earned a doctorate degree in literature and eco-criticism from the University of Mohammed I Oujda. He is currently an assistant professor of English at Qadi Ayad University of Marrakesh, Morocco. He is interested in eco-criticism, narratology, environmental justice, and urban ecological voices of the global South. Some of his published articles include Environmental Ethics in Jean Giono's The Man Who Planted Trees, Interdisciplinary Research Within Environmental Humanities, a reading of Dan Brown's Deception Point, and recently, Narrative Scholarship in Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Mohamed, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Chairperson, for the nice introduction. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be with you today. And I thank all the members of the organizing committee for all the wonderful work they are doing. My paper tries to fathom the nexus between narrative and affect, and the focus is on Allegra Hyde's short story, Shark Fishing, published in 2016 as part of the collection of short stories of This New World. The story follows the journey of the main character, Dawn Vargas, as an environmental activist, and how she ended joining Camp Hope, a camp run by Roy Adams. Roy asks Dawn if she ever thinks of living the solution, meaning the solution to the current environmental crisis. And for him, the solution is starting an eco-centered society, proving one could exist beyond the American SLP of morning commutes and disposable Starbucks cups. We ask the question at the very beginning of this paper, why narrative and affect? So affect is central to the representation of the Anthropocene itself, in the sense that all the stories we tell today, especially those stories about non-human life forms, should incorporate some affective features in their structures. And Patrick Colmhagen has extensively written about stories and their structures, and he has published a number of works that deal with the structure of the stories and how authors incorporate emotions in the structure of their stories. Because for him, this has always been the tradition in storytelling from the dawn of history. So for Don Vargas and Roy Adams and the other biologists in the story, the grassroots might be part of a solution to the environmental crisis. In this context, the narrator explains that Roy needed doers, not just dreamers. No wishy-washy hippie stuff. Apparently, several recruits for his Eco-Dream team had already dropped out. And the question of affect is central to fictional representations, as we said, because emotions capture the interest of readers through the creation of strong attachments to the characters. And for affective eco-critics, the ecological discourse of the previous decades has failed to change human attitudes towards the environment because it's solely focused on reason. For instance, the number of scientific articles that foreground rationality in tackling the ecological crisis is huge, yet they did not have much influence on human practices. On the one hand, these articles enhanced the environmental discussion, but on the other hand, they failed to change the anthropogenic destruction of the environment. So conversely, nowadays, the novel and new developments in neuroscience, cognitive eco-criticism, and cognitive narratology, to mention a few, shift the way texts are interpreted and perceived. These new theories assert that narrative has the potential to transform the environmental imagination thanks to simulations and the cultivation of emotional responses. Emotions allow readers not only to empathize with characters in narratives, but also to simulate the environmental reality in distant areas on Earth. Thus, it could be argued that emotions are the main reason behind the success of literary tales, since they serve to increase the involvement of readers in storytelling. So emotions allow readers to empathize with Allegra Hyde's character of Don Vargas and to simulate the environmental reality of the Lutherans. Thus, it could be argued that emotions are the main reason, of course, behind the success of literary tales such as this one that we have in front of our hands, Shark Fishing. In fact, these textual cues help the readers to inhabit this new story world of Don Vargas and to experience the direct influence of environmental destruction on the poor and the helpless human beings. So in the short story subplot, there is some discussion about cruel practices of colonialism, enslavement, and over-exploitation as actions that have led to the demise of the people of the Lukians. Dawn decides to join Camp Hope and to teach as a way to take her own environmental activism a step further beyond what she terms delay the inevitable. This inevitability, in fact, might become problematic, as it does for Don Vargas in the narrative, because it suggests a sense of helplessness, a sense of despair in the face of the crisis. So Dawn lectures in Camp Hope about ecological issues in attempt to change the consciousness of the students. She said, I spoke about interconnectedness, diversity as resilience, the wobbled limbs of a banyan tree, dolphin pods, ant colonies. It's all tied together, I told them. Ecology in all dimensions, past and present, reality and imagination. In this sense, shark fishing is reminiscent of Aldo Leopold's concept of land ethic, which enlarges the meaning of community to include soils, waters, plants, and animals, as well as human beings. It's a state of interconnectedness, as Don Vargas explained it in the short story. Thus, here Leopold's idea of land ethics does not look at non-human entities as lifeless, but rather as vibrant entities that are full of energy flows. By the end of the story, it turns out that the work of the biologists itself is questionable, because if we look at this passage, everyone was busy celebrating the work of the biologists. Earlier that day, they'd pulled a monstrous primeval shark from the depths. Eyes iridescent, green. The shark had never seen light the way we had, swimming so deep. So the main concern is for funding. It's not this concern, this shark fishing for the sake of funding does not seem quite right. But at the same time, there is this reason, this argument that one needs money to do research. So what is certain by the end of the story is that this story questions many myths. And also, one of these dominant myths is what Glenlove calls eco-centered consciousness, or ego-centered thinking instead of eco-centered thinking. Dawn and other characters do, of course, all have goals, different goals and different pursuits in the short story. And according to Hagen, the goal is what keeps the story interesting, as it stands for the main bulk of the story. Goals also play an important role in enhancing empathy. So through this immersive power, readers can empathize with the main characters and learn to see environmental phenomena from a new perspective, that is to say, the perspective of the characters. The use of a character focalizer allows readers to have a direct access to each character's relational attitudes towards fellow humans and non-human others. The rich cues facilitate the transportation of readers by analyzing modalities such as point of view, familiarization, and characterization, as well as their ecological implications. This study analyzes human intellectual and emotional processing of narratives and its implications for our relationship with non-humans. So spatial and temporal cues help the readers to experience the story world of Eleuthera and the banyan tree, the sun, the sharks, and among other non-human beings are all part of this rich and varied story world. It should be noted that the narratives focus on human tragedies, on Don Vargas, does not eliminate the agency and the vibrancy of non-human forms, since the human, as Stacy Alamo argues, is always intermeshed with the more than human world. As a conclusion, Don Vargas realizes the hope in Camp Hope is about storytelling, and it is about how those stories are told in a way that gives full attention to life forms such as the sun, rocks, bunions, sharks, and so on. And